So there I was thinking about what nerdy thing to be hyper obsessed about this week, when I came upon Dungeons & Dragons. Now, I had played Dungeons & Dragons many times before. I've DM'd plenty of games. In fact, I love DMing games. It's one of my favorite parts about the game. So I got the idea to mix it with something else I've been hyper obsessed about for my entire life, Pokémon. And I figured, these are two pretty popular things. Surely someone has done this. And yeah, they have actually. There was a couple of systems invented for Pokémon tabletop games called Pokémon Tabletop United and Pokémon Tabletop Adventures. So naturally I started going over the rules for these games and I tried to play them, but I didn't like them. I was a little shocked when I found these games that despite Pokemon's massive popularity and appeal, these tabletop versions of Pokemon weren't very popular. Pokemon Tabletop United was the more popular of the two, so I decided to go with that, but after I read through the rules and tried to do a couple playtests with it, I found it to be very complicated, to say the least. Don't get me wrong, I find it very impressive and I appreciate the huge amount of work that's gone into something like Pokemon Tabletop United, but I find a lot of the systems and mechanics and whatnot a little overbearing and kind of hard to explain to people and play. There's a lot of little mechanics in the game that kind of make it inaccessible for a larger group to play, like having slower Pokemon act first but attack second, and faster Pokemon attack second but act first. It's really confusing and it makes the game kind of hard to play with more than like one or two people, and it grinds the combat to an absolute halt. Whenever I tried to run mock tests of Pokemon Tabletop United, pretty much as soon as we got to the combat and, there wasn't just freeform role-playing, people sort of got really confused and were wondering why their fast Pokemon was not going, and I'm like, no, you didn't read the rules, you get it, and it was just a mess. It was a mess. Couple that with the fact that any group more than like 2 people for Pokemon Tabletop United is just not feasible to run, just for how long the combat, role-playing, controlling all their characters goes. It doesn't work. And it turns out that in my research into this Pokemon tabletop world, I'd actually found out that a little while ago the developers of the game have sort of abandoned it now. And by that I mean that they were pouring a lot of time and effort into something that really did not take off in popularity, and a lot of people had criticisms of and couldn't really play in big groups. So they just decided to, hey, alright, we're done. So naturally, I saw this and I had a really big desire to play something like Tabletop Pokemon. It sounds like a really fun way to sort of live out that little fantasy that people have always wanted from Pokemon. The fantasy of becoming a Pokemon trainer, doing some of that wacky stuff that Ash does in the anime, where he just like commands his Pokemon to like do combination attacks and like fight together and like use the terrain and stuff to your advantage, stuff that you can't really get from like the games or spin-offs. So with Pokemon Tabletop United sort of fizzling out and my desire to play Pokemon Tabletop RPGs growing, I decided to take matters into my own hands, I guess. I set out to make a Pokemon Tabletop RPG that is accessible, can be played in large groups, is easy to understand, and is not slow. And while what I've developed is still in its work in progress phase, I figured I would just put some of the stuff I've made out there and sort of get feedback from anyone else who's interested, and to see if we can just make something out of this, and maybe we can actually make a Pokemon Tabletop RPG that people want to play. I've done a couple of playtests so far. I have refined it as much as I could based on those playtests, and I think I've actually developed something that plays pretty smooth and is pretty interesting and fun to play even with a big group, and I'd like to share that with you guys. However, today, instead of going over like the entire rule set and like all these hundreds of pages that I've written, I think I just want to focus small, start small, and we'll talk about the starter Pokemon that I've developed for the game, their unique abilities that they have, how I developed the stats for them and whatnot, and we can go from there. And if you guys want to see like everything I've developed, all the documents, the Pokemon lists, the move lists, and the effects, and all the unique Pokemon traits, as well as like the basic rule sheet of the game, which is about 30 pages right now, and it's kind of rough. It's still work in progress. I'll link it in the description. You can guys can go look at that and give me feedback if you want. I'd appreciate that. But for now, let's just focus on like Bulbasaur, Squirtle, Charmander, and their evolutions. I just want to explain to you a little bit, and maybe you can get an idea of how this game works. Now, I'm going to start by saying that my game system is streamlined as much as possible in order to make combat and roleplay and whatnot go as smooth and as fast as it possibly can. And I've done that so that this game can be played in big groups. I want you to have at least 4 to 5 players in your game, and all of them just having fun and not waiting around 30 minutes for their turn. And I'll definitely make a video that goes over the rule sheet, mechanics, and systems more in depth. But for now, I just want to focus on something a little more surface level to dip our toes in. And if you want to go read the rules and mechanics and systems that I link in the description below, or you want to wait for the video of me covering them and giving me feedback, that'd be great. That'd be great. But for now, we're going to start surface level. Going to give you a little taste, talk about the starter Pokemon. Let's go. So for every Pokemon that I have designed in this game, it basically consists of the Pokemon, their stats, and their unique traits. Each Pokemon has their base stat block that they have at level 5, and the unique traits that they can do, which can consist of unique actions, unique perks in either role-playing or in combat that they get, stuff like that. So when taking into account the different starter Pokemon, Bulbasaur, Squirtle, Charmander, they were the first Pokemon I wrote these traits for. So I really wanted to make sure each of them, not only in their base form, but their evolved forms, were pretty distinct from one another and had their own different strengths that they could play to that none of the other ones had. In order to determine the stats of the Pokemon in my game at level 5, I basically took the base stats of the Pokemon in-game and I just rounded it to the tens place. So a Pokemon like Bulbasaur in my game has an HP stat of 5, an attack of 5, a defense of 5, a special attack stat of 7, a special defense stat of 7, and a speed of 5. And you can see how that correlates directly to Bulbasaur's real base stats in the game. And we'll talk about base stats more in a different video. I have a whole system with leveling up and whatever, but let's focus on Bulbasaur right now, and that's Bulbasaur stats. Let's go ahead and talk about what makes Bulbasaur unique, why you want to use Bulbasaur. So I tried to make a lot of these unique traits the Pokemon have accurate to the lore of Pokemon and the Pokemon's unique Pokedex entries and all that, saying what they can do. So we've made it so Bulbasaur is a very loyal Pokemon. So one of the passive benefits it gets just as existing is that it's very loyal. It's really hard to make Bulbasaur become unloyal to you. It will always give you the benefit of the doubt. You know, it's a Pokemon where things go south and you start doing bad stuff, or you let your Pokemon die too much, or you neglect them, forget to feed them or whatever. Bulbasaur might forgive you. Bulbasaur is always going to be there, and he's always going to be like, hey, you know what, man? You know what? You're going through it. I'm loyal to you. We're homies. So Bulbasaur, very loyal Pokemon. Of course, we can't talk about Bulbasaur without his bulb. Bulbasaur stores nutrients in his bulb, so he sort of made that into part of his gameplay mechanics. So as a bonus action, Bulbasaur can heal himself for 1d4 health, or he can move an extra 5 feet. So you sort of get a little dynamic there of, do I need to heal right now, or do I need to move out of the way of maybe a potential attack that's coming through? I might consider buffing the movement a little bit, but I don't want to go too overboard on these early stages of Pokemon. So I want to keep them, you know, where it's not too crazy. Their power level's kinda low. But of course, as Pokemon evolve, they get stronger, and that's what I want to illustrate. So Bulbasaur evolves into Ivysaur, gets a whole new set of stats, and its unique abilities sort of improve, and it gets some other things too. So Ivysaur is where we see the extra movement mechanic from Bulbasaur get expanded upon. Once per turn, Ivysaur can absorb sunlight into the plant on its back as a free action, right? So for every turn of charge that it's stored in its bulb, it can move an extra 5 feet the next time it takes movement. So every turn you can be using this free action to get an extra 5 feet of movement the next time you take movement. So giving you an example, if Ivysaur charges sunlight over the course of 3 combat rounds and doesn't exceed its current movement speed, let's say that's 30 feet, he never goes over 30 feet in a turn, on his next turn he can decide to go 45 feet because he'll have an extra 15 feet of movement from charging the sunlight 3 times. So that gives Ivysaur a lot more mobility compared to Bulbasaur, who only really had an extra 5 feet and had to use the bonus action to get that. But we do include a drawback here, where this ability can only be initiated in direct sunlight. So this is where we sort of get towards the more of a gimmick of the Pokemon, where Ivysaur can't do this without the sun. So if you're fighting in like a dark cave or inside of a building or whatnot, this ability is not going to be accessible to you, or you're going to have to make it accessible to you through some other means of making you get creative. So Ivysaur might not be the best Pokemon to use in certain situations, but outside, wow, he's really fast. He can move a lot. That's the kind of dynamic I want to go for in this, where you have a lot of Pokemon. I don't want you to rely on one. I want there to be different Pokemon for different situations that you want to use. And to close out Ivysaur, I also just improved upon Bulbasaur's healing ability. As a bonus action, Ivysaur can heal itself for 1d8, doubling from Bulbasaur's 1d4. So get a little extra healing as a bonus action if you want. And there you go, Ivysaur. Moving on to Venusaur, we're just really building upon the concepts we found in Ivysaur, really. So Venusaur also, as a free action, can absorb sunlight into the plant on its back. But instead of moving an extra 5 feet, it can move an extra 10 feet. So let's say Venusaur had a movement speed of 30 feet initially. If you charge the sunlight over the course of 3 rounds, on the next round, you're going to have double your movement speed if you choose to use that, which makes Venusaur a deceptively fast Pokemon, which also is reflected sort of in-game. Venusaur is not that slow, so I just really wanted to like play into that dynamic where he's kind of fast. You want to watch out for Venusaur. He might look big, but he can get you. And I sort of also took inspiration from like the chlorophyll ability that Venusaur does get, which makes him a really fast Pokemon under the sun, which I wanted to reflect here. But otherwise, Venusaur is just pretty basic as an improvement to Ivysaur. Venusaur can also heal itself, just like Bulbasaur and Ivysaur can, with a bonus action, but this time for 1d12 health. And you might think, oh, 1d12, that's a lot, or whatever. When you get into other videos or look through my documents, you'll see damage in this game is pretty high. I wanted to keep the combat pretty offensive and pretty quick and snappy. So damage is pretty high in this game. So 1d12 health is really not a lot of healing, but it might save you from death on like a certain attack. But let's go ahead and get into the next Pokemon. Let's get into Charmander. Get the Charmander, Charmeleon, Charizard line. What do they got? What do they got? What's the difference? So Bulbasaur, Ivysaur, Venusaur, they get an extra movement and they have a little healing. That's what their sort of stuff is. So with Charmander, Charmeleon, and Charizard, I really just wanted to go offensive. This Pokemon's about offense, not doing anything fancy, not doing any really tactics-based thing like doing extra movement or deciding when to heal or not. No, Charmander, Charmeleon, and Charizard, they are doing damage. That is their role. They are doing damage. They're no nonsense. So when speaking about the Charmander line, it's obvious, the flame on their tail, right? If that's weak, they're weak. If that's strong, they're strong. That's how we've reflected it here, and it just made the most sense to go in that direction. So Charmander's flame here, we got Charmander, it's tied to his health. When he's above half health, the flame burns really brightly, and fire attacks gain an extra 1d4 damage and an extra +2 to hit. So you're more likely to hit with your fire attacks, and they do extra damage. And that might not sound like pretty crazy, but 1d4 damage at like the low level in this game that I've designed is pretty wild. Like Charmander himself, you can see here, only has 4 HP. So that 1d4 can really go a long way in the lower power levels of this game early on. But Charmander's pretty simple. This line's pretty simple. So we're going to move on to Charmeleon here. And Charmeleon, pretty same. We got his flame tied to his health. When he's above half health, his flame will burn really bright, just like Charmander, and his fire attacks instead gain 1d6 damage and +2 to hit. So not a huge difference over Charmander, but just a little more. But we didn't want to leave it at just that. We wanted to give Charmeleon a little extra something to just separate it from just being a slightly better Charmander, right? So when Charmeleon is fighting an opponent that's higher level than it, it makes Charmeleon really excited to battle. Really excited, just like how Ash's Charizard was in the anime, you know, it really wanted to prove itself against opponents that were stronger than it, and it didn't want to bother with weaker opponents. That's what we wanted to sort of reflect in Charmeleon and Charizard, and there's also data in the Pokedex to back it up here. But, so when they're fighting a higher level opponent, the flames will burn like a bluish white color, and it'll increase the fire damage from fire type attacks by 1d6. So not only are your fire attacks gaining 1d6 damage and +2 to hit when you're above half health, but if they're also stronger than you, you're getting an additional 1d6. So all of your fire attacks are doing 2d6 more damage when you're above half health and they're stronger with you. You know, it's a certain set of parameters that have to activate this ability, but it's a lot of, you know, risk versus reward. You're fighting someone stronger, you have to be above half health. I think this is a really great way to illustrate Charmeleon and Charizard in this context, just making them really strong when they're strong. But with that said, yeah, let's just move on to Charizard to finish it up. It's, again, just improving upon what Charmeleon did and Charmander did. So his fire attacks are going to gain 1d8 damage and +3 to hit when he's above half health. So while Charmeleon did not get an extra +1 to hit, that it just stayed the same as Charmander's, Charizard gets +3 to hit now, which is pretty significant. I mean, you got to think about that. Like, you roll a 10, that's a 13 now. And he also gets the 1d8, just slightly more damage. And we also added a couple bonuses to Charizard just to sort of make him even more like, hey, this isn't Charmeleon anymore. So Charizard's flames are so hot that they can melt boulders. So you can use that in like RP, out in the field, you know, if there's a boulder blocking your way, you want to burn through like a cave wall or something, Charizard's got you with that. And once per long rest, this is Charizard's big draw right here, once per long rest, building off of this melting boulder thing, once per long rest, Charizard can inflict super effective damage on a rock type Pokemon. That's right. Normally that would be not very effective damage, but Charizard can just say, hey, you know what? I'm turning it up. And you can just melt a rock type Pokemon if you really want to. You can just do super effective damage to that Golem. Why not? Once per long rest, so you can't be using this like every battle. Not gonna happen. But it's a great, you know, I can't get through this rock type Pokemon. Charizard's my only option. I need this rock type gone, off the field, now, or else Charizard's in big trouble. Boom, you have an answer right there. And if you use it, maybe you're going to get in trouble later on if another rock type Pokemon shows up. But that's what Charizard's all about, that risk versus reward, that when I'm strong, my power is strong. You know, avoid taking the damage from the rock type, take them out, keep your buffs up, your damage buffs from being above half health. That's what Charizard's about. And in addition to that, it also builds on Charmeleon's ability to have increased its fire damage when it fights opponents that are higher level. Charizard keeps that, but it also ups the damage to 1d8. So you're getting an extra 2d8 if you're above half health and they're higher level than you. So Charizard can be dealing out some serious damage, absolutely serious damage. But with Charizard out of the way, let's go ahead and move on to our favorite little water turtles, Squirtle, Wartortle, and Blastoise. So when talking about Squirtle, we obviously gotta do something with the shell, right? So as a reaction, Squirtle can withdraw into its shell and temporarily boost both its defense and special defense by 2 stages. That's huge, that's huge. So to give you some context, in this game it sort of works like, you know how in Dungeons & Dragons you roll to hit. So the enemy has an armor class of 15 and you roll your 20-sided die and you don't roll a 15 or up, you don't hit them. That's sort of how it works in this game, except it's split into 2 different attacking and defending types. So let's say a Pokemon uses Tackle against Squirtle, who has a defense of 7. When they roll their 20-sided die, they have to roll either a 7 or above to hit Squirtle and deal damage. If they roll under that, they're doing no damage. The attack misses. And this is split into defense and special defense. So a special attacking move like Thunderbolt, for example, Thunderbolt, in order to hit Squirtle, the roll to hit on Thunderbolt would need to be a 6 or above to hit Squirtle. But if Squirtle raises its defenses by 2 stages, then those numbers have to be higher in order to hit Squirtle. So Squirtle essentially becomes harder to hit when its defenses go up. Now there is a drawback to this. So you use this as a reaction to when an attack is incoming towards you, okay? So Thunderbolt is coming at Squirtle, he uses this as a reaction, basically upping your defenses and having a chance of the attack now missing you when it might not have before. So the drawback to this is that this will cost Squirtle half of its movement on its next turn. So on the next turn that Squirtle goes, say his movement was 30 feet before, now he only has 15 feet on this turn. To add a further drawback, since this is really powerful, Squirtle will automatically fail any speed checks made against it. Which basically means that if anything were to happen where Squirtle would need to roll to get out of the way of, to get out of the way really quick, or else it'll take damage or whatever, Squirtle will just fail that. It'll just fail and take that damage or take that effect, whatever caused it to make that check. However, there is one more little gimmick associated with the withdrawing into the shell, which is that attacks that hit Squirtle will send Squirtle in the opposite direction by a certain distance depending on their power. Sort of like a Koopa shell, right? So if like a Pokemon uses Tackle, it ends up hitting Squirtle. In this state, Squirtle will be thrown backwards in its shell and will slide around, it'll bounce off objects sometimes, it'll hit other Pokemon, it'll hit other targets, hit objects, stuff like that. Since the benefit of this ability is very powerful, I just wanted to give it a couple of drawbacks and just that sort of unpredictability with the movement when you do get hit, so that you can't just, use this every single time. You have to actually think, like, ooh, do I want to use this? There's like lava behind me, or there's a cliff behind me. What if I use this and then Squirtle gets knocked off the cliff? That's gonna be bad. I want this to have a little give and take. But the ability is really powerful, so I didn't really want to mess with it too much when Wartortle comes into the picture here. So Wartortle pretty much has the exact same ability. Its defensive stats go up by 2 stages when it goes into the shell, sacrifices half of its movement, yada yada yada. Same exact thing. The only thing that's different with Wartortle is you get a little nice bonus. The Pokedex and whatnot for Wartortle likes to mention that Wartortle can hide in water. It has a very nice stealthy ability when it's in water, so I just reflected that here. It can take the hide action as a bonus action when it's in water, so we get a little stealth bonus with Wartortle when it's in bodies of water. That's really the only difference between it and Squirtle ability-wise. However, Blastoise is where it gets a little crazier, right? So Blastoise has the same ability to withdraw into the shell and whatnot, except we've removed the uncontrollable movement if you get hit while you're in the shell. So Blastoise is really heavy and stuff, so he's not just pushed back by random Rattatas tackles anymore. He stays firm where he is. However, we gave Blastoise his own unique ability as well. When Blastoise uses any attack that utilizes water, the pressure from the water will launch Blastoise in the opposite direction by 10 feet. So for example, if Blastoise uses Hydro Pump, like at the floor, Blastoise will be launched into the air by 10 feet. And you can do this in any direction, if you want to launch it at a wall and go vertically, horizontally, diagonally, whatever, you can do that. You just move 10 feet in the opposite direction of where you shoot. And this can be used on attacks like against targets. So if I shoot Charizard with a Hydro Pump, I'm going backward 10 feet after I shoot the Hydro Pump at him. And by the way, this doesn't provoke any opportunity attacks. So in some tabletop games, if you move out of an opponent's range without disengaging first, they'll be able to hit you for free. This does not provoke that. So if you shoot a Hydro Pump at Charizard when you're at point blank right in his melee range, you can move backward 10 feet, escape the melee range, and he can't do anything about it. Now you might be wondering, hey, what if there's like, I don't know, like a teammate or an enemy or just some other Pokemon or creature or object in the path of Blastoise when it gets shot backward? Well, don't worry, because we accounted for that. Anything that is in Blastoise's path when it moves backwards must succeed on a difficulty class 10 speed saving throw, or else they take 1d8 damage. If you don't know, that means that if you're in the line of fire here, if you're going to be where Blastoise is when it goes backwards, you have to roll a d20 and get a 10 or better based on your speed stat, or else you take damage. And while this might seem like Blastoise and Venusaur have a little overlap by giving them both pretty great movement abilities, the difference here is that Blastoise's is a little more uncontrollable. You might not be able to use any water attacks because whatever's behind you is dangerous to Blastoise. So even though like a Hydro Pump might win you the battle right in this moment, it might also take out Blastoise if it misses, because you might just go face first backwards off a cliff, So that's where we're sort of keeping the element of Squirtle and Wartortle, bouncing around in their shells uncontrollably. We're sort of keeping that in Blastoise a little bit. But yeah, those are the 3 starter Pokemon and their evolutions and their unique traits that I've added to the game. Things aren't set in stone, definitely not. I have rewritten these unique trait abilities and whatnot that these Pokemon have like 3 to 5 times each, just because I would think of certain things like, oh no, I can't do this, or why wouldn't you do this every turn, or whatever, and I had to rewrite them so that there was more of a risk and reward to them and whatnot. But if you see something that you don't like, or if you have an idea for them, feel free to let me know. I am definitely willing to change some of these or edit them and whatnot. This is all a work in progress, and I'm trying to move through as many of the Pokemon as I can just to get everything on paper first before we just go back and like edit things, refine things, get it all done like that. Like, if you look in the documentation that I have, like, you can see I have, like, up to, I think, Electrike done, so all the Pokemon from Bulbasaur to Electrike are pretty much done. I'm not sure I wrote Electrike yet, actually, but that also includes, I just sort of knocked out some cross-gen stuff, like cross-gen evolutions and whatnot, and pre-evolutions, while I was just working on that family of Pokemon. So I have things like Probopass is done, I think Cleavor and Scizor are already done. But I'm just open to changing things. There's a lot of Pokemon, so just, you know, getting ideas and coming up with the unique traits for them gets kind of hard. You know, when you have like 8 Caterpillar Pokemon, it's kind of hard to write unique traits for all of them. But I'm trying my best to make it interesting. But yeah, take a look at my documentation, take a look at everything I have, and make suggestions. Let me know what you think. I would like for this to just, you know, just keep getting developed until I finish all the attacks, all the Pokemon, have a nice solid base for the rules, and I just want people to play it and tell me what they think, because on the sessions that I've tested this so far, I got pretty good reactions to it, and I could tell the more I ran it and refined it and made it faster and more easy to understand and cut features that weren't working, people seem to really enjoy it. So I want other people to enjoy it too. I don't want to sit here with these documents on my Google account and just have them sit here for the rest of eternity when I've worked on them for like a lot of hours for no reason. You know, I want there to be a reason that I have worked on these. But yeah, if you want me to go over some more things about the game, just let me know. Let me know what you're interested in seeing. I can go over other evolutionary lines of the Pokemon, tell you what I've done with them. I can talk about more of the mechanics and the baseline, make a video about the rules and systems about the game. Whatever you're curious about, just let me know and I'll make a video on it. That's totally good with me. I'll make videos until I have the whole thing documented in video form, because that'd be a nice resource for people to have. In case they need more clarification on how certain things work. But yeah, let me know. This is already long enough as is. I'm going to edit this down as small as I can to make it concise. But thank you for checking out this Pokemon tabletop stuff. Thanks. Bye.